Hey everyone, and welcome to this workshop on the basics of dog training. My name is Karthik. I'm an internationally certified dog trainer and canine behaviorist. Now, this workshop is for pet parents, animal enthusiasts, and fellow dog trainers. And the purpose of it is to just help um, compile all of that information and knowledge that's out there and share it with all of you. Um, I think that we're in a time where you know uh, dogs have become quite popular in modern day households, and while we have all these expectations from them, it's important that we do our fair bit to understand where they're coming from, and that's really the purpose of this workshop as well as all the other workshops that we do. All right, so now uh, dog training is not a theoretical subject, so I will do my best to include a lot of practical examples as we go through this workshop. Um, but yes, the workshop is fairly theoretical, and you know, while it's important to understand all of these concepts, you need to spend time with dogs and just observe them and actually work with them hands on to be able to apply any of these, right? So whatever you learn here, let it just be in the back of your mind. Dog training is more of an art than a science. You do have to get your hands dirty and literally start working with dogs to be able to understand these concepts in full depth, right? But yeah, so without any further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the subject of dog training is not something that's new, right? It's been around for a very, very, very long time. I guess the only thing that's changed is the way that we address it and the way we talk about it. You'd be surprised to know that it was called dog breaking once upon a time, right? And today we call it reward based dog training. When they used to call it dog breaking, it was essentially about fulfilling a job, right? You had to break the dog to be able to control them, to be able to harness their skills and capabilities, and that's really what dog training was about originally. If you look at it, humans and dogs had a symbiotic give and take relationship, right? So when we domesticated dogs, we did it because they could serve a particular purpose and make life easier for us. And it was only over the years that we realized that they can be such amazing companions, and today we have them sitting inside our houses on our sofas, right? So a lot has changed. Dog training also was once job specific. It was very specific to a task, right? A lot of breeds that you know today, whether you've got the spaniels, the shepherds, the retrievers, they were all bred for a very specific purpose, right? And a lot of the training was to do with that purpose, right? So if you had a herding dog, they had a role to play. They had to herd the sheep, or they had to protect livestock. Whereas if you had a hound, they had to actually go out on a hunt, right? So a lot of training was job specific. However, what's happened today is that the skill sets required from our dogs are quite different from what it once was. Companion dog training, as we call it today, is very, very different from a lot of traditional dog training, because today our dogs are expected to have a totally different set of skills, ranging from emotional sensitivity to being able to share the household with a human, and comprehend what we're trying to say, and be around crowded, busy environments, right? So the expectations we have from our modern day dogs are so much more. Earlier, the systems of dog training were entirely based on following instructions, following commands, following a strict discipline. But today it's become very, very different, right? It's so much more about a relationship, about being able to live a life that is gratifying for both the dog as well as us, right? um, yeah. And today the dog training systems are a lot more about understanding the needs of your canine companion, right? Being able to understand where they're coming from, listening just as much as trying to teach. Yeah, so in this workshop we will understand that and we will study that in a little depth, right? Before we go ahead, uh, just going to talk about Clever Hans. This is an interesting story about a horse named Hans. Now, Hans and his handler proclaimed that they could do math, right? Basically, his handler said that Hans could solve math problems. He could solve written problems, he could solve oral problems. So when you asked him a math problem, he would actually tap his hoof that many times, right? Or make a sound. And this was quite shocking to everyone. An animal doing math problems, that's really quite something. So they did a lot of research on this. They started to study the handler as well as their horse. They were suspecting that this is just a trick, but they couldn't really find anything. It was only after a lot of observation and investigation that they found that the horse was actually responding to very, very subtle signals given by the handler on his face expression. What's even more surprising is that the handler wasn't apparently aware that he was even giving these signals. So, when the handler knew the correct answer to a math problem, he, had a change in expression or gave these subtle changes in his face expression, which the horse would pick up and see as a cue to stop tapping his hoof, right? So, that's really how the horse learn to do math. Now, the reason I'm talking about this story is that animals have an ability to observe us to the T, right? And they are watching us every millisecond of the day. So every small expression can actually be, your dog could actually be learning something from every single expression that you give out. So that's very interesting for a dog trainer like me, right? To think that every little minute thing has an influence on how your dog thinks, right? Which opens up the world of dog training so much, right? So this was a very interesting story. You guys can actually check it out. You can just search for Hans solving math problems, and I think you should be able to find it, right? So it's an interesting story worth reading about how animals can learn from even the subtlest of signals that we give. Yeah. All right. So now we're going to talk about how dogs learn. Now, I understand that dog training and behavior is quite a vast subject, right? And we want to jump to the finish. We want to know how to train our dogs, how to get them to do stuff, how to get them to listen to us, how to get them to just not do all those naughty things that they're doing. But it's important that we go in this order, so that your training can be most fruitful. So as I said, modern dog training is all about understanding the dog before you actually get them to do stuff, right? So we are going to be talking about how dogs learn. First of all, there are different types of learning that we see in dogs. Now, these different types can be seen with dogs in nature, in dogs in the wild. You can also see this in our pet dogs, and you can also probably observe this in animals at large. So let's go over the different types of learning. Number one, we have observational learning, right, which is the most obvious kind of learning. This is how the puppy learns, by watching the mother and the older members of the social group. Even in households, you may have noticed puppies learning to climb the steps when they were once afraid, just by watching a family member or a person in the house climb it repeatedly. So this is just plain observation. This is nature's gift to all animals, and we just learn by watching what the other one's doing, right? This is the most obvious and simplest form of learning. Next, we've got shaping. Now, the word shaping it's a type of learning that we actually used to use a lot in marine mammal training, and we also use in dog training. You may have heard of clicker training, right? This is a way we've harnessed shaping in dogs. So shaping is basically where the dog naturally performs a behavior, right? And then we reward that behavior, right? So we've actually shaped a particular behavior. Now the prerequisite for shaping is the dog needs to naturally perform that behavior for us to put it on cue, right? Dog training is all about putting things on cue, right? So if you have, let's say, a dog that sat by themselves and we were to reward the dog would very quickly learn through shaping that sitting gets us a reward. Now we didn't get the dog to sit here, the dog sat by themselves, right? So that's really what shaping is about. That's a form of learning. Next, we've got guided learning, which is by far the most commonly used in the dog training world today. Guided learning, as the name suggests, is where the dog is guided physically to perform a particular behavior, right? So the dog may be physically guided or manipulated to perform behavior, or the dog may be lured into the behavior by using a piece of food, whatever. It's all forms of guided learning, right? Where the dog learns by physically being guided. It is the simplest, most straightforward form of training, because we're actually teaching the dog, much like teaching a child how to use the spoon or how to hold a pen or a pencil. This is guided learning. Next, we've got trial and error learning, which is again primarily for the survival of animals, and it's inbuilt in every animal. Trial and error learning is where the puppy experiments and learns to do or not to do something based on external factors. A simple example of trial and error learning would be, maybe a dog learning to perform something very specific. Let's say dogs on the street, on an Indian street, they learn through trial and error not to get on the street, because they would have realized that every time they got on the street there's a fast moving vehicle that zips across, right? So through trial and error the dogs learn to avoid a busy street and move on the footpath, right? So that's trial and error learning. Next, we've got latent learning. Latent learning is a very powerful form of learning, and it happens when the dog is resting. Now you may wonder, how can the dog learn when they're resting? A lot of what the dog learns gets solidified when they're in a restful state, right? And very often we use this in training. You'll hear trainers always tell you, do not keep your training sessions for more than maybe 10 to 15 minutes at a stretch, because what happens after that is you need to give the dog a chance to rest, and it's when they're resting that a lot of this learning gets solidified. Very often in professional dog training, you'll find that a dog is performing so much better after they've gotten up from the rest, right? And you'll be surprised, they were only doing this much and suddenly there's this boost where they just seem to get it, right? So that's latent learning. Next, we've got avoidance learning, and as again the name suggests, the dog is learning to do or not to do a particular behavior in order to avoid something unpleasant. This used to be used in older forms of training, which were very crude and brute. Under avoidance, one second, yep, all right, sorry for that. So in avoidance learning, we've got two forms. We've got active avoidance and passive avoidance. Active avoidance is where the dog learns to perform a behavior to prevent an unpleasant stimulus. An example would be when the old school trainers had a choke chain or a prong collar on the dog's neck and would tell the dog to sit. Now the dog had to sit. So the dog had to sit to prevent the unpleasant stimulus of that they would feel on their neck because of the prong collar. Right? So that is an example of active avoidance. Passive avoidance, on the other hand, is when the dog learns not to do a behavior in order to prevent an unpleasant stimulus. So an example would be, let's say a dog is jumping on a table and the dog gets very badly reprimanded every time he jumps on the table, the dog would learn not to jump on the table to prevent the unpleasant stimulus of of that reprimanding or that screaming that you would do, right? So that's avoidance learning. We try not to use avoidance learning in modern day dog training because we've got much more effective methods to get a dog to do something, especially active avoidance, totally unnecessary. All right. Insight learning. Now, insight learning is not on the books, right? And the reason I say that is when the dog learns to do something abstract, something surprising, shocking, by actually using some complex kind of logic. They had a group of monkeys in a room and they would hang some fruit on the ceiling out of the monkey's reach. And what they observed is the monkeys were actually able to form a sort of a pyramid to go and get that fruit that was on top. Now, no one taught the monkeys this, right? They just figured it out. They just, and that's really what insight learning is. There's no explaining to it. And while science would dismiss a dog's ability to do this, we've observed some magical instances. One such story that I've heard of is about a hot dog shop. I think it's somewhere in China, where the dog actually learned to pick up pieces of paper and hand it over to the hot dog seller to get a hot dog. The dogs observed and saw people handing over money notes to the hot dog seller and getting their hot dog, and somehow the dog stitched all these things together and started to do it, right? So this is an interesting story, and today apparently people give their money to the dog to actually go and hand it over to the hot dog seller, and get a hot dog. So that's a nice story. All right, so we just spoke about the different types of learning in dogs. Now, the next concept that we need to learn about is that of classical and operant conditioning. Two words that you'll always hear going hand in hand with dog training. Now, if you've done psychology in high school, this is something you would have probably already studied. So these were psychology experiments to start with, which have now formed the basis of a lot of dog training concepts. So let's go over classical conditioning first. Now, classical conditioning, the experiment was actually called Pavlov's experiment. Ivan Pavlov conducted this experiment on a dog, coincidentally. And what he did is he would feed his dog every day, and he noticed that his dog would salivate every time he offered the food. Now he started to accompany a bell each time he was offering the food. Now the bell here is something we call a neutral stimulus. And on repetition, what he started to realize is that the dog would salivate on the mere ring of the bell. Now, without even the food being presented. So even in absence of the conditioned stimulus, which is the food, we could actually get the response of salivation from the dog, right? So an involuntary response could actually be triggered by something as neutral as the ring of a bell. This has tremendous application in modern day dog training and more so dog behavior, right? We use classical conditioning in order to shape by the method of shape a lot of involuntary behaviors, right? One of the common things that we do is we create a classical conditioning pairing with a scent or a music track, to calmness for the dog. And you'll notice that the very introduction of the scent or the music can trigger, a feeling of calmness in the dog. We use this when the dog has to go to the vet, or the dog has to travel in the car and they're feeling a little anxious, or during thunderstorms. So this form of scent therapy, we call it, is actually used quite widely in modern day dog behavior, right? So that is your classical conditioning, where it actually accounts for reflexive and involuntary behaviors in the dog. So in this experiment, salivation is involuntary. In the scent therapy that I just spoke about, the behavior of calming down is actually involuntary, right? The dog doesn't decide when to do it, right? So we can take charge of these involuntary responses just by using some kind of a neutral stimulus, just knowing how and when to introduce it. Yeah. So even in clicker training, a lot of what we see is classical conditioning, right? Because in clicker training, the very association that the dog forms with a clicker, right? So in clicker training, you click and then you give a reward, right? So the dog associates the click with the arrival of the reward, and they will very often expect the reward the moment they hear the click, right? So this is also used with marine mammals quite a lot. Now, operant conditioning is another concept, and I would say it is more important in the field of dog training. The operant conditioning experiment was conducted by Skinner, who is also a famous psychologist. He conducted the experiment on mice, right? He had the mice, he had designed an intricate maze, and he set it up such that the mice would get rewarded for certain behaviors, for navigating the maze and going to the finish line, and would have some kind of a consequence for not doing so. And very quickly he noticed how quickly the mice learns, right? This is the traditional carrot and stick approach, right? Where the mice learns to do or not do something in order to fetch a reward or avoid a consequence, right? So we have a 4-quadrant system when it comes to the operant or instrumental conditioning, about the instrumental conditioning. And unlike classical conditioning, operant conditioning takes voluntary decision making capabilities of dogs into consideration, right? So here we account for the fact that dogs can make choices, right? And we teach the dog that they're going to have either a reward or a punishment for those choices, and that's how the dog learns. Now, before we go into the next slide, I want you to remember that whatever you learn here is just theory, right? So theory is just going to give you the framework. Now, a lot of this, when put into application, may not be the way you expect it to be. Dogs are not robots, right? So this is only to give you a framework. Along with the framework, you need to take into account the dog's ability to process your emotions, the dog's mental state of mind. They are living things, they are living sentient beings, so we have to account for that natural aspect as well. Yeah. So what you see here are the 4 conditions on the left. I've got my mouse there. These are the 4 quadrants, we say, of operant conditioning. I'm sorry, this is classical conditioning, my bad. Alright, so we've just got some photos, probably it's on the next slide. Yeah, this is what. So we've got 4 quadrants of operant conditioning, right? The 4 quadrants, it takes time to study this, and in all honesty, there are trainers that don't understand the 4 quadrants even today, right? So please do your research after this workshop, but I'm going to explain it in a very crisp way to you. There are 4 quadrants, right? You've got positive reinforcement, which is the plus R that you see there. You've got negative reinforcement, which is the minus R. You've got positive punishment, which is the plus P. And you've got negative punishment, which is the minus P. Here, plus and minus is used only to describe positive and negative. Positive means something is being added into the mix. Negative means something is being taken away from the mix. Number 1. This is a very important point. Secondly, R and P mean reward and punishment. Reward is anything that can increase the intensity, duration, or frequency of a behavior, right? So food, when used in training, can sometimes help to increase the intensity, frequency, or duration of a behavior, right? Make a dog do something better. Now that's a reward. P, on the other hand, is a punishment. It is anything that can reduce, that has the ability to reduce that intensity, frequency, and duration of the behavior. So an example of a punishment would be maybe a a water spray bottle, right, which the dog finds unpleasant. So the dog, it reduces the tendency of the dog to perform a particular behavior. But mind you, the same water spray might actually be a reward for a golden retriever or some other breed of dog out there. So we need to really approach these with an open mind. So these are the 4 quadrants. Now when we talk about positive reinforcement, what we mean is you add something into the mix and thereby increase the chance of a dog performing a behavior. So that's like giving a treat, and so every time the dog gives a handshake, they get a treat, and they're going to give you more handshakes, they're going to be more active in giving you handshakes. Then you've got negative reinforcement. There you see that photo, you see a dog with a chain or a slip lead. So every time you remove freedom to increase the frequency. So what are we doing here? So in negative reinforcement, when we're increasing the frequency here, for example, the dog, we are increasing the good behavior, which is we want the dog to walk nicely on the leash. And how are we doing that? We are restricting them every time they pull, right? So the short leash being held is actually reinforcing the behavior of the dog walking nicely. So that's negative reinforcement. Mind you, that technique might not really work, right, in practicality. You've got positive punishment, where, as you can see, spray bottle, so the dog reduces a particular behavior, whatever it may be. And then you've got negative punishment. Here what you're doing is, as you can see, the lady is ignoring the dog. So she's taking away the negative, she's taking away her attention in order to reduce the frequency of jumping, right? So R and P here, reinforcement and punishment, mean increasing and reducing the frequency of the behavior. Plus and minus, positive and negative, just means adding or subtracting. A lot of people have a belief that positive reinforcement is the only way to be. It would actually be impossible to train a dog with only positive reinforcement. Even the most force-free trainers will employ a little bit from the other quadrants, right? But that's because you need to understand what each of these are. As you can see, negative punishment, which is where the lady is ignoring the dog, is often used by positive reinforcement trainers, right? But they will not even know, and they will say that, hey, I'm only positive reinforcement. A better term to use for trainers would be reward-based dog trainers rather than positive reinforcement dog trainers, right? I understand that there's a lot of hype out there for positive reinforcement dog trainers, but when you really go into the subject, you start to understand what that means, right? So just putting that out there. And so you can, if you are a trainer, you can go and call yourself a reward-based dog trainer, right? That's a better way to put it than positive reinforcement dog trainer. Now, next we're going to talk about different theories of motivation in dogs. A lot of these theories are based on industrial psychology, right? It was techniques used to motivate the masses, to get them to do stuff, right? So please take it with a pinch of salt, but they are very useful. That being said, knowing these concepts can help you place a lot of techniques that you might be using with your dog, right? So the first concept is fixed and variable reinforcement. Fixed reinforcement. Every time my dog performs a behavior, I'm going to give him a treat. I'm going to give him a treat. I'm going to give him a treat. So the dog is going to expect a treat every time they perform the behavior. Now, all of a sudden, when the dog performs a treat behavior and I don't give them the treat, the dog's going to get really upset, right? And if you don't give them the treat the next couple of times, they're going to lose their motivation to perform whatever it is they're doing. One of the reasons why a lot of people get stuck in the bribe stage of training, where they're giving treats and they say, hey, my dog doesn't listen to me without treats, they haven't been able to wean off the treats, is because they're using fixed reinforcement. Now, variable reinforcement, on the other hand, is all about surprises. The dog doesn't know what they're going to get, when they're going to get it, and how they're going to get it. So when the dog sits, I'm going to give them a treat. The next time they sit, I'm just going to give a scratch behind the ear. The next time they sit, I'm going to give 5 treats. The next time I'm going to say good dog and take them out for a walk. You keep mixing things up, right? And you keep mixing the type of reward, the frequency of the rewards. It keeps the dog guessing and keeps them always excited to perform, right? This will keep the dog motivated and ensure that the dog doesn't, you know, get too disappointed when you don't give them that treat, right? So fixed and variable reinforcement is one of the concepts used widely in modern day dog training. We need to incorporate a lot of variable reinforcement into any training that we do. Second, we've got Grandma's law, which is also called Premack principle. So I think we've got a small photo down there next to the logo. Premack principle basically means you find something that's intrinsically a reward for the dog, maybe their meal, and just before that you insert something that the dog may not be that fond of, something that's just on the line, something neutral, right, in order to encourage them to do it. So, grandmothers would say, finish your homework and I'm going to get you ice cream, right? So very quickly the dog learns that, okay, the child learns that I'm not too fond of doing my homework, but I'm just going to do it anyway because I get ice cream after, right? Also used quite a lot in dog training to get them to do things that are not particularly, of any value to them, but they realize that doing it can eventually lead up to that. When I used to work at a pet store, I used to run the pet store, we would often have dogs that don't like the grooming experience, but they learned over repetition that each time they went through that grooming experience, they'd come out and get a very nice piece of treat. So you'd have these dogs coming and jumping on the bathtub voluntarily, just saying, get it over with, because I know after this bathing experience, grooming experience, I'm going to get that yummy treat, right? So that's an example of Premack. Third, you've got Dodson's law of performance. This is basically just you can see the graph over there. You've got arousal on the x-axis and you've got performance on the y. When the dog starts to get aroused, right, you have an optimum level of performance, level of arousal that can give you the highest performance. This is important for a lot of dog trainers that train their dog for skills or performing very particular tasks. You cannot work with low levels of arousal, neither can you work with very high levels of arousal. Different dogs progress through their arousal states at different speeds, right? So if you can find that optimum place of arousal, then that's your jackpot when you're training your dog. You have to identify the level of arousal where you can get the dog to perform behaviors beautifully, right, and keep them in that level of arousal when you're doing your training, because anything beyond that is only going to rattle things up. So that's Dodson's law. Finally, you've got the P scale of pleasure and punishment. The P scale has two ends. You've got pleasure on one end and you've got punishment, right? In the P scale, when we talk about the pleasure side, we always navigate from low to high. If I give my dog a very high pleasurable, something of high pleasure, let's say a piece of bone, and then expect them to respond for a piece of treat, chances are a little, sleek. So we always graduate from low to high when we talk about pleasure. So we first give lower value rewards and then we graduate to higher value rewards, because if we were to use high value rewards first, nothing below that works. Yeah. And on the other side, we've got punishment. Now on the punishment side, it's the very opposite, right? If you start from low levels of punishment and go to high, you'll have a dog that gets desensitized to the punishment. Now please take this word punishment in the right sense, as we discussed in the previous subject. It's not about causing physical harm to the dog, but if you were to give mild punishment first, right, and take it high, the dog gets desensitized to it. An example, if you were to go and work out in a gym, you start with the smaller weights before you go to the heavy weights, right? And your body gets desensitized. If your instructor asked you to lift the heaviest weight in the gym room, the first day you went, you never want to go to the gym again, right? So with regards to punishment, we don't want the dog to perform the behavior. So we always introduce the highest punishment first. But again, there is you know uh, there is a bubble here. You really need to understand what's okay and what's not, right? So that goes into ethics and practice. But yeah, on the punishment side, uh, a punishment will work and the dog will learn through a punishment only when the first one is on the higher end and not on the lower end, right? Just something to keep in mind. All right. Okay. All right. So now we're going to go into the crux of it. We're going to talk about reward based dog training, and that's what we call dog training nowadays. Gone are the days where we're using all those forceful techniques, strong physical manipulation to get the dog to do what we want. Today, it's more about ease and fun. Yeah, and let's head into it. Okay, so today, the reason why we train our dog, three reasons. All right, number one, to help us understand us, our lifestyle, our language, where we're coming from. That's the first, right? Because the whole purpose of getting a dog is to have a companion, right? And you would want your companion to understand where you're coming from. So that's the first reason we get a dog. Second reason, even in modern day times, we get a dog to explore their potential. You know, it's sometimes sad to see you have these amazing dogs sitting in all these households without their potential being explored. Sometimes pet parents are totally blind to the fact that their dog holds so much of talent inside them and it's waiting to show expression, right? To explore their potential. That's the second reason why we train our dogs. And you can see some of the working dogs out there, dogs that work as therapy dogs, emotional support dogs, or maybe sniffer dogs, police dogs. You can see them being the happiest because they are able to fulfill their purpose. Third, it is to build a strong and fulfilling bond, and this goes beyond the physical. And there's something about that connection with an animal that is so gratifying and that can really change lives, right? So these are the reasons why we train dogs, because we want to be able to experience all of these. We want to be able to enjoy all of this with our dog. Now, that being said, dog training today is based on one word, or I would say two words. It's no conflict. No conflict is the state that you want to reach with your dog. So the epitome, right, the peak of a relationship is perfectly expressed in those two words, no conflict, right? Because what you want is what the dog wants. What the dog wants is what you want, right? You are in a state of sync, and that's essentially what you want to achieve through dog training. And as I mentioned earlier, the basic knowledge of dog behavior is essential before you go into training, because it saves you a lot of time, and it also will help to put things into perspective, right? You will be able to place a lot of things that you're doing with your dog into these this kind of a framework, right? And finally, training is about listening first. As I said, training system today involves listening to the dog, being sensitive to their needs, right? That's really what makes it so gratifying and beautiful, right? We don't need to force instructions on the dog, because if that's really what we wanted, we could just get a robot. And today we have AI and whatnot, to get things done. We get a dog for something very personal, right? So we need to learn to listen. All right. So a famous quote there by Dr. Ian Dunbar. Dr. Ian Dunbar is a famous veterinarian, and he's also a dog behaviorist. So he has the best of both worlds, a lot of experience, wonderful human being. So he said that the goal of training is not perfection, but just progress towards it. So there's never really a finish line, right? In dog training, you're constantly working, and you need to learn to enjoy that progression, right? That's really what dog training is about. You work with your dog, and every day you're making these little tiny steps of progress, and it's just wonderful to see how you build that communication. So there's never really a finish line, and if you are really looking for a finish line, you'll be sadly disappointed one day, and you will realize that it's the journey that makes it that much better. Um, in reward based dog training, as the word suggests, we use rewards to motivate behavior, but that doesn't mean that we only rely on positive reinforcement or only the delivery of rewards. Training is about building a form of communication with your dog, and if you want your dog to completely understand you, you need to be able to communicate, with a wide array of tools, right? So we do not use only positive reinforcement in reward based training. We make sure that we use a bits of the other spectrum wherever it is needed. But the one thing to keep in mind is we never cause physical harm on the dog in any way, right? That's a complete no-no, and it's not needed. When we've found that all these reward-based techniques can be so effective, then why use those outdated methods? Now, in reward-based training, we need to understand what a reward is. A reward is basically anything that is of value to the dog, and that can probably help motivate a dog to perform a particular behavior more. Um, there are two types of rewards. You've got primary rewards and secondary rewards. Primary rewards are based off of the basic needs that a dog has, like hunger, thirst, need for shelter. So primary rewards, you've got food, you've got shelter, you've got sex, you've got everything that the dog needs, right? Secondary rewards, on the other hand, are not directly needed for survival, but these would include things like play, touch, praise. They are social creatures and they enjoy hanging out with us. Unfortunately, today a lot of training relies on primary rewards and only primary rewards. If you stick to primary rewards, you are basically just discounting for a lot of potential that your dog has. So we have to make sure we use secondary rewards in our training. They are more reliable in the long run, right? You don't want a dog performing just for a piece of food, right? The mistake that people make is their over dependence on primary rewards, which makes a dog believe that, okay, so this person transacts with me only based on the food that he gives, right? So it becomes a very a cold relationship. All right. Now, we're going to talk about shaping and guiding behavior, which is an important aspect of reward-based training. As I mentioned earlier, shaping and guided learning are two forms of learning that are heavily employed in modern day dog training techniques. All right. So in shaping, we use something called a marker, right? And as the name suggests, a marker marks a particular behavior, right? To be more specific, we call it a reward marker. We have other kinds of markers as well. We have something called a continuity marker. We have something called a no reward marker, right? The marker is used to mark that particular point of time where the dog is doing something that we like, right? So when the dog sits, you may say the word yes or okay, right? That would be your reward marker. It's a verbal marker that you use to mark that. Now, how do you establish a marker? The word yes does not have an intrinsic meaning to the dog. So what we do, based on grandmama's law, is the moment the dog performs the behavior, we say yes, and after the yes, we give them that piece of treat, right? And over a period of time, the word yes becomes synonymous with treat coming soon, right? So that's an example of a marker. Very often, clicker training, the click becomes the mark, all right? So that's shaping. Now, similarly, luring with food. Along with the use of markers, we also use the technique of luring, where we physically guide the dog using sometimes a piece of treat or sometimes just a leash to perform the behaviors that we want, right? In luring, we often hold a piece of treat in our hands and we hold it to the dog's nose, gently guiding them to perform the behaviors that we want. Luring has been one of the most effective and reliable techniques, and probably 95% of dog training that's out there uses luring as a first stage. When we lure a dog, then the first step is to actually get them to do the behavior. We call that the lure stage, right? So you're luring the dog, and after you start luring the dog and the dog starts to understand the behavior, you can start to bribe them, which means you show them the piece of treat and you say, can you do this for me, and then I'm going to give you the treat. The dog does the behavior because now they know what to do, and then they get the treat. And the final stage is the reward stage, where the dog does it without you having to show the treat, or the dog will just do it in anticipation of the reward without you having to display that you have a piece of treat in your hand. To go from the lure stage to the reward stage is really what the training process is about, and you have to move through these stages very gracefully. A lot of times people get stuck in the stages because either of an over dependence, or sometimes they're impatient, or they end up training the dog too much in the wrong times, right? So this is the progression. So you have a lure stage where the dog follows the lure, you have a bribe stage where the dog is being bribed literally to perform the behavior, and you have a reward stage where the dog no longer needs a bribe, trusts you to perform the behavior in anticipation of a reward which is not in plain sight. Okay, so yeah, we even discussed about how we can fade the lure and get to the reward stage using variable reinforcement, where now the dog, if they don't know what they're going to get, when they're going to get, and how they're going to get the reward, you're going to find that they're a lot more excited to perform for you, right? And you'll reach that reward stage where the dog's offering you the behaviors without you having to, show them that treat or show them the finish line or reward that they're going to get, right? So that's fading the lure. And now if you see on the PowerPoint over there and you see that flow chart, you need to see that there is an order of things. We always, when we add a command, we use a lot of verbal cues in training. We say sit, we say down, you say the dog's name, we say come here. The placement of that verbal cue is really important. The verbal cue has to come before the physical cue. So if the physical cue of getting a dog to sit is raising your hands like this, then the verbal cue has to be told before that, right? What happens very often is we find that people say sit. So the verbal and the physical cue are happening together. The dog sits and then they get the treat. When you do this, the dog doesn't learn to comprehend the verbal cue, right? So you need to say sit, followed by the gesture, and then the dog sits, and then you say yes, which is your reward marker, and then you give the reward. Another mistake that people make is they use the reward marker and reward delivery together. So they say yes, right? It's important you say yes and then give the treat, because otherwise your dog's not gonna create any value with that marker, which is yes, right? So it's a very important flow chart, and you need to get the hang of doing this with the dog. I really don't know how else to explain it, but the sequence is really important. Never use the verbal and the physical cue together. And you'll see another point there written, half-second behavior disassociation time. You need to have the physical cue within half a second of giving your verbal cue. So that's sit, hand gesture. And you need to have the behavior being performed within half a second of you showing the physical cue. So there's only needs to be a half a second gap between each of these in order to make your training precise and get results quickly, right? So in probably some of the videos to come, we will be demonstrating this practically, so you will have a better idea of how this works, right? But theoretically, this is the order. Alright, so next we're going to talk about basic obedience training, which is the term we use to describe the standardized training that we give to our dogs. Today always you'll have trainers going around saying basic obedience training for your dog, right? It's the bare minimum, right? So this is a set of commands and basic things that we teach our dog, which has been found to be essential, right, to have a peaceful, happy life with your dog. That being said, having a well-trained dog that does all of this doesn't necessarily mean you have a dog that's well behaved and perfect, right? There are a lot of other elements that come in, like socialization, behavior, and so many other things which um, need to be worked on. But essentially, having all of this will help whether you have whether you're living in a estate or you're living in a city. These basic skills are needed to communicate with the dog and get them to do the bare minimum, right? So what are the basic obedience commands? You've got watch me, which is where you teach the dog to look at you. Most important, most fundamental, and probably the first thing that we teach our dog. This is basically the dog's name. When you say the dog's name, you expect them to look at you. When you teach this to your dog, you will have them give you so much more focus, which enables you to teach them all the other commands or the instructions that are down there. So the first one is watch me. The second basic obedience instruction that we train is a recall, which is teaching the dog to come when called. Dogs do have a desire to stay with you, right? They are social animals, but we damage it in so many ways by calling our dog for the wrong things, right? So this is essentially teaching the dog to come to you on cue, right? It's very useful when you're stepping out to the dog or you're in an off-leash park with the dog and you want the dog to come to you, right? Basic skill. And we start with this after you've taught the dog, watch me. The next are your control commands. Control commands are basically just teaching the dog basic positions like a sit, down, and a stay. These are essentially just to teach the dog to be a certain way. So for example, I think all of these go together, right? Although sit and down are different positions, we usually use it when we want the dog to stay put, right? Many times we have distractions in our environments, we have other dogs, we have people. So training a dog to stay put, right, is essential. So that's basically what these commands are. So you have your control commands. The next kind of basic obedience commands we would like to teach our dogs are a leave it and a no. These are corrections. Why do we need corrections? Because when you step out, there are going to be many variables, and as much as we would want to, there are situations where you'll have to tell your dog not to do stuff, right? So a correction is essential, whether it's for a child or a dog. So you need to train your dog to even understand these corrections. Today, a lot of people go around just correcting the dog, without attaching any meaning to it, and you'll see the dogs are actually very confused. A lot of times we mistake a confused dog for a dog that doesn't want to listen to you or is very stubborn. More often than not, these dogs are actually just really confused. They don't know what you're trying to communicate, right? So correction is an example. You need to teach the dog the meaning of a correction, and the word correction means to steer the dog in the correct path, right? So you need to teach the dog that as a skill, as a command. All right. Finally, you've got heel. Again, the word heel originated long time back. It was used actually by gun dog trainers because you'd want the dog to actually be by your heel, because they would always be on the left side because they would be holding the gun on the right, and they want the dog, and they were mounted on horses sometimes, so they wanted the dog to be just by their heel, right? But of course today it doesn't have the same application, but it's used in walking, where we teach a dog to walk beside us. While it's not important that you put all of these things on verbal cue, it does really help, right? And training is the process of making the dog understand all this when it is put on cue, right? Now that's about your basic obedience training. Another little something that we use in reward based training is leash pressure. Now a leash has become a part and parcel of a dog's life, right? When we live in the city, gone are those times where you can just let the dog free. I mean, of course, if you have a big estate, you live in a farmhouse, that's okay. But if you're in the city, you're going to have to put the leash on. And even if you were in a farm, you'd have to have the leash on every time you're maybe taking your dog to the vet, taking them out for something. So the leash has become a universal requirement for having a dog. So introducing the leash and teaching the dog what pressure on the leash means becomes very important. um, Dogs are going to get stressed out when they have this leash contraption on them. Many of them learn to pull vigorously, and we actually encourage this behavior of pulling without our knowledge. So leash pressure is teaching the dog to be sensitive to the pressure and understand that stopping when they feel pressure on the neck is actually the best thing that they can do, and probably even rewarding. This skill can go a long way in preventing a dog that pulls on the leash. You have these large breeds of dogs in apartments. So leash pressure is something we teach. And how do we teach leash pressure? With the exact same concepts that we learned earlier, with the same format of shaping, of course, luring. We make the dog understand these things. So we will give you a physical demo of all of these in some of the workshops and videos to come, right? And tools of the trade today for a dog trainer, you've got a lot of tools, to be honest. You've got whistles, you've got clickers, you've got all sorts of toys, you've got different types of rewards, you've got all sorts of treat pouches, you've got jackets, vests, you name it. There's so many tools. But if you really look at it, these tools have only disabled us from being able to understand our dog better. If you look at it, your need to use all of these tools is only because you've not been able to get through to the dog, right? So essentially the only tools you're going to need is rewards that you know that the dog enjoys, and again, you don't have to go overboard with using food as a reward. You'll need a collar and a leash, and of course you'll need your attention, your consistent your commitment to work with the dog. So essentially these are the only tools of the trade. But yeah, you've got a lot of things out there, and it does help to give that a read. You've got harnesses and different types of collars, and while you may not use all of these, it'll be helpful to have a little bit of understanding about them. All right. So as I've told you earlier, this is a theoretical workshop, right? It's very difficult to teach dog training theoretically, but what we're trying to do here is just introduce you to the various concepts, so that when you are actually training your dog hands-on, you'll find this is almost like a little bit of a roadmap, right? That is going to help you reach your results sooner. So we just finished with reward-based dog training, and now we are going to go into proofing and real-time training. Once you've trained your dog to a certain level of satisfaction, this entirely goes on what you're trying to train for, what degree you want to train your dog to. Once you've trained them to a certain degree of satisfaction in a safe, controlled environment, then you can take this training outdoors. We don't start our training in busy outdoor environments because it reduces the rate of success, right? So once we can get a dog to perform in controlled settings, we can add all the distractions, right, and take it outside. Sometimes people make the mistake of not spending enough time building the foundation in a controlled environment, and later on they just find their dog to be just so distracted in the outside environment. So training starts in a controlled setting. The different steps to a well-trained dog are as follows. You have training, which is what we spoke about earlier. Then you've got practicing. People will ask me, how long does it take to get your dog fully trained? And I never really had an answer to that, because going back to Dr. Ian Dunbar's quote, there's never really a finish line, right? So this whole concept of fully trained is not something that I understand, right? So we practice. So when we train, it's important that we practice. So when you have a pet dog and you get a trainer to train the dog, you see that the trainer is the one practicing, right? And very often you'll have the puppy responding only to the trainer. It's important in the modern day system that we as pet parents get directly involved in the training process. So it's us, we need to practice the training regularly. Once we've practiced it, then we go to overtraining. When we practice it enough, we just know the dog knows it, and we're just in the state of sync. That's when we do something called overtraining. We train our dogs to a much higher degree than what is expected out of them. Right? An example is, if I am training my dog to stay, I just want a dog that will have a good stay, that's able to stay when I go to a restaurant and sit comfortably beside me. I'm going to teach this dog to stay in the presence of movement, stay when I'm running around them, stay when there are kids playing around. Now I'm really increasing the the benchmark. And the reason you do this is, when you overtrain your dog, it's going to be a lot easier when you bring them into that real-time setting. So overtraining. The next step is proofing. Proofing is actually when you take your dog into that real-time setting, whether it's the restaurant or it's the dog park or it's the vets, and you actually train or practice the same skill. In the proofing stage, you're making sure that the dog is able to perform that behavior effectively in that new setting with whatever distractions there may be. And once you've done enough proofing, then you actually do testing. These steps are actually for us as dog trainers, and this is how dog trainers would actually train the dog for a very specific task. But even if you're a pet parent, it helps to know this. If you can follow this kind of a structure when you're training your dog and employ it to each individual skill that you're teaching them, from a basic control command like a sit or a stay, to maybe their recall, or even how they respond to corrections, and you can build it up to the point where they will respond to it wherever, whenever, however, then you've done the work. And that's what training is all about, right? So these are the steps to a well-trained dog. Another thing we're going to discuss here, which comes into play, is once you've done some of the simple dog training, or the basic obedience as we call it, there are also complex behaviors that you can train the dog to do. Often you will see with service dogs that they're trained to actually pick something up, or maybe open the fridge, or remove a sock. And sometimes you'll see dogs on these videos doing all these complex tasks. So you've seen dogs in the agility crafts competition navigating all these obstacles at lightning speed. So these are complex behaviors, and you need to make sure that your basic behaviors are very sound before you get to this. A complex behavior is a combination of a lot of behaviors, right? So if you have a dog that is going to, let's say, bring something to you from the fridge, that involves a lot of simple behaviors, right? You have to teach the dog to go to the fridge, you have to teach the dog to open the fridge, tug at the fridge door with some kind of a rope. You have to teach them to pick up an object, you have to teach them to hold the object, you have to teach them to bring the object, and hand over the object to you. So you can see there's a lot of individual steps involved in this, and each one of those steps has to be taught to perfection before we go into the complex behavior. In complex behavior training, we use something called reverse chaining, right? Reverse and chaining. Chaining is basically where we chain behaviors together. Have you ever noticed where you're studying for an exam and you've got this big book that you need to read? Sometimes we start studying from the last page, and you'll see that when you do this, as you get to the finish line, you actually know what you're going to be reading, right? Because you know the last page. So we start from the finish, and very often this is a very effective form of learning that works really well with dogs. So in dogs, when we train them for complex behaviors or things like agility, where you have a lot of obstacles that the dog has to navigate, you've got a hurdle, you've got a loop, you've got a seesaw, you've got a tunnel, right? You've got things they have to go through. We start from the very last behavior, and we start adding behaviors one by one. So if the dog has to go through a loop at the end, we train the dog for the loop, and then we add a loop with a tunnel, and then we add a loop with a tunnel with a seesaw. So you add steps, but start from the finish line. This is a technique we employ quite commonly. Not going to go into detail because that's definitely for another presentation or another workshop altogether, but that's reverse chaining. Other complex behaviors that you may have seen in companion dog training, you've got to go to bed, where you teach the dog to go to the bed and stay there, or maybe a go to crate. You've got to go get, where you can teach the dog to clean up the room and go pick things up. You've got to retrieve, where you can actually teach the dog to retrieve, which is one of the simplest form of complex behaviors that we can teach a dog on cue. So that's about complex behaviors, and you can see the wide array of things, the photos there, from skateboarding to carrying all those silverware and dishes on the nose. The sky is really the limit to this. And a lot of people are doubtful whether it's possible for their dog, but the truth is it is. The question is, are you willing to spend enough time and effort in order to achieve these, right? So that's a little bit about complex behaviors. And a popular saying by Karen Pryor, training a dog should be more like playing music than waging a war. It should be fun, right? This is really what the crux of dog training is. You cannot train your dog when you're trying to do it like a task, right? You need to enjoy the process, right? And in that process of enjoying, you actually build something that's very special, something very magical. So yeah. Okay. Now, before we finish this workshop, let's go over a bunch of things that can make your training process successful, easy, and fun. Number one, understand what your dog sees as a reward and what they don't. Unfortunately, again, people force rewards on the dog sometimes, right? So clearly understand, and this comes from observation, comes from learning the dog language and spending time with them. You see what your dog really views as a reward and use that in your training. You'll find that some of the rewards are the most unexpected. It could be something as simple as time on the grass, right? As time on the grass, you can probably see it as maybe sunbathing, an opportunity to sunbathe, or maybe just a chance to dig. Some rewards can be quite funny. All right. Second, keep your training simple and to the point. Don't elongate. Don't try to add too many steps. Don't try to overcomplicate it. Keep it simple in black and white for the dog. Keep your training sessions short and fun. As I've mentioned earlier, long training sessions don't work. Dogs don't learn from those. So when you're trying to train your dog, you spend a couple of times a day, twice or thrice a day, concentrated 6 to 10 minutes where you're training them. And just to add to this point, you don't want to train too many behaviors at the same time when you start off, because that's another mistake. We're in a rush to teach our dogs, much like we raise children, right? We want our kids to be the best at everything that they do, but that just doesn't work. You work on one thing and you motivate, spend time, go with your dog's pace. Right? It's not a competition, right? It's about making it easy and fun for both you and the dog. Focus on rewarding the correct behavior rather than correcting the undesirable behavior. So many times we are only focused on telling the dog what they shouldn't be doing, right? While the focus should be teaching them what they should be doing rather than what they shouldn't, right? Because you'll find yourself having to correct so many behaviors if you're focusing on that side of what the dog shouldn't do, right? So focus on teaching the dog what they should be doing, and then you'll find that you won't have a need to correct them as much. Consistency is key. Like anything else in this world, be consistent. If you are changing your training styles every now and then, your dog's going to find it very hard to understand what you're trying to communicate to them. So be consistent, keep at it, and you are sure to see results. Build enthusiasm in a behavior before you add control or precision. Yeah. So when you start training your dog, it's important that you don't make it boring. When you do too much of control, you have to do this, or you should be staying in one place, dog loses interest. So we always start with enthusiasm in a behavior. So if I want to teach my dog to do something, I build enthusiasm, I make it fun. I don't nag them or correct them for every little mistake they make. I I just encourage them wholeheartedly for every little thing that they do. And only by doing that, in the later stages, will I be able to add some kind of control or precision. Right? So all the precision comes later, enthusiasm first in training. Next, use your environment to support you. Uh, Dog training becomes very linear when you just restrict it to that treat pouch and a piece of treat and that leash. Right? You have rewards all around you. You just have to keep your eyes open and observe your dog. Sometimes you'll find that something around you, maybe just a door, can be used as a reward for a dog that enjoys stepping out. Right? So, being a trainer is about being versatile. You need to have your eyes and ears and your senses open at all times. It's a dance with the dog. So you never know what's a reward. So be open to all the rewards. Don't, close off your perception to only what you read in these theoretical workshops. Um, don't always go by the book. Think outside the box. Be creative. Um, in all honesty, if we were not creative, we would have never gotten dog training to where it is today, right? And we still have a long way to go, and we need to always learn to think out of the box and be creative, right? And the way to do that is focus on observing and spending time with the dog first, right? You can read all the theory that you want, but it's not going to help you be creative. As a matter of fact, if you focus only on theoretical matters, it's going to make you very, very closed in terms of how you approach dog training. And finally, enjoy the process. It's all about having fun, right? The whole purpose behind sharing all of this knowledge, theoretical knowledge, is for us to be able to have fun with our dogs in the end. That's the reason why we opted to get a dog in the first place, right? They bring so much of joy and fun into our lives. So, all of this learning would actually be of no use if you're not having fun at the end of it. So, while you go on this journey of training your dog, make sure you enjoy every little step, enjoy every little failure, because in each of those failures, there is something very magical, right? For the relationship between you and your dog, right? So, yep. And with that, we come to the close of this extremely theoretical workshop on the basics of dog training. Now, in this workshop and all the slides that we went through, we've discussed a lot of concepts, and some of them might be a little heavy for you to understand. But what I suggest, and this is how I learned a lot of dog training myself, is once you've accumulated all of this knowledge, or you've heard it, you've given this a listen once or twice, don't try to hold it in your head, right? You don't need to try to remember these concepts. You just have to give it a read and let go, right? And then you start working with your dogs, start training your dogs. Maybe you want to hire a trainer and get them over, but take the effort to learn alongside your dog. Take the effort to ask the trainer questions. Take the effort to be a part of the training process, right? And if you are just an enthusiast looking to become a trainer, don't miss any opportunity to spend time with dogs, whether it's volunteering at a shelter or just shadowing another trainer. Take every opportunity, right? And as you do that, you'll suddenly see that someday you're able to fill in the blanks and you're able to attribute what the dog is doing to something that you've studied. And from there, your training is just gonna take another level, because now you will be able to apply these concepts. So that stage of application will come much, much, much later, right? But just give this a read. This is just information that's put out there. And really hoping that this will go a long way in crafting some beautiful relationships between you and your dogs. Right? So we have come to the end of this workshop. If you have any questions or queries, please do drop a comment or mail us, and we will be more than happy to help you out. We do offer a wide array of services, from dog training to behavior consultations to therapy dog training, and you name it. We're also launching a lot of courses. So, follow our pages and we will keep you up to date on all of that. But, anyways, for all of you that are watching this, and if you've stayed this long, right till the end of this, thank you so much. And I think if you have stayed till the very end, then this is something that matters to you quite a lot. So, please, along with all of this knowledge, spend time with your dogs and have fun. Have fun. Dog training is supposed to be easy, dog training is supposed to be fun, and dog training, beyond everything, is a way to build a spiritual connect with your dog. So rather than just seeing it as a sit down stay, we can start looking at it as a means to connect with something higher. Yeah. So with that, I will finish this. Thank you so much and see you guys soon.